Thank you, Sophia, for your well-prepared lesson on the first half of Genesis chapter 18. Today we will read to chapter 19, so if you have a Bible, you can follow along. We will learn about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 6 through 8, it says, "If by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes, he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard." Jude chapter 1 verse 7, "Just as Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, which likewise indulged in sexual immorality and pursued unnatural desire, serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire." Okay, we're going to begin in chapter 18 verse 16. Remember, 3 men had visited Abraham earlier in the chapter. One of them was the Lord. The Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, I am, which was revealed to Moses in Exodus. This man was very likely Jesus, although it doesn't say that, of course. They were leaving, and they looked down towards Sodom. Abraham was following them as they were leaving. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him? For I have chosen, or known, him, that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know." In this portion of the Bible, we see the contrast between Abraham's kingdom and Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's kingdom is just beginning, while Sodom's kingdom is about to end. Abraham will bless many nations. Sodom helped to corrupt many cities and maybe nations. God has chosen Abraham. God has determined to judge Sodom and has cursed Canaan. Abraham is commanded to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice. Sodom rejects the Lord and is not righteous and does not have any justice. This chapter also demonstrates the power of prayer. God has heard an outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord will go to Sodom to test their wickedness. Now you will see Abraham's influence with the Lord. In verses 22 through 23, I'm going to just read this. "So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, 'Will you indeed sweep the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?' And the Lord said, 'If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake.' Abraham answered and said, 'Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. I, who am but dust and ashes, suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, 'I will not destroy it if I find 45 there.' Again he spoke to him and said, 'Suppose 40 are found there.' He answered, 'For the sake of 40 I will not do it.' Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose there are 30 found there.' He said, 'I will not do it if I find 30 there.' He said, 'Behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there.' He answered, 'For the sake of 20 I will not destroy it.' Then he said, Oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this once. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. So I wonder what would have happened if Abraham suggested 5. Anyway, we don't know. This seems to me the model of how to pray in Genesis. They didn't have the Psalms yet. It does remind me of when Jesus gave the church a model of how to pray. You could use Abraham as a model to pray in your own prayer life, although Jesus is probably a better model. Abraham has compassion that some people living in Sodom and Gomorrah might be righteous and pleads for their life. Abraham admits that he is but dust and ashes before the Lord, and tries to be careful not to make the Lord angry by his requests. Amazingly, the creator of the universe accepts Abraham's repeated requests. This should remind us that we have influence with God when we pray, and the Lord cares about what we want and has a relationship with us. By the way, in Islam, Allah originally wanted Muslims to pray 50 times a day, but Muhammad continuously requested the number to be lowered, so the number went from 50 times a day to 45 to 40, all the way down to 5. I think Muhammad probably took this idea from Abraham. Anyway, remember in chapter 9 when Noah cursed Canaan, there is an interpretation that I'm warming up to that the reason Noah was so angry with Ham was because Ham was sexually excited when he saw his father naked. Maybe he tried to influence his brothers to experience the same thing. Noah might have been furious at Ham's extreme sexual perversion and maybe cursed Canaan, Ham's son, because he was noticeably more perverse than anyone else. Maybe he was influenced from the world before the flood. This would help explain Noah's extreme reaction to Ham. Perhaps Ham and Canaan's sexual perversion has continued until now everyone in Sodom has been completely given over to extreme sexual perversion. But we're going to read about that next. In chapter 19, verses 1 and 2, the two angels, not the Lord, but the two other angels, came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. Lot met them and bowed respectfully and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." The angel said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." Clearly, Lot wants them to spend the night with him, and early in the morning he wants them to leave. Lot knows very well what these people are like. Lot knows how sinful Sodom is. The angels want to go right to the heart of Sodom to see how sinful Sodom really is. Lot strongly presses them not to go to the town square, but to go directly to his home. So the angels entered his house. Lot made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. This hospitality is similar to the hospitality of Abraham in the last chapter. Before they laid down, the men of Sodom surrounded the house. Moses stresses it was every single man in the city. Every single man of Sodom is surrounding this house with the two new visitors. These men called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." The word know means sex, just like when it was used in chapter 4. Now we really know how sinful these people are. Sodom's hospitality is very different from Lot's hospitality. They found out that Lot has two male guests, and they want to have homosexual sex with them immediately. Not only is this homosexual sex, but it's also rape. By the way, the word homosexual was not commonly used until after the sexual revolution in the West, in the 60s or 70s. Before the sexual revolution, the term was sodomy. The term comes from Sodom and Gomorrah. Sadly, there won't be 10 righteous people so the cities can avoid God's judgment. In verses 6 through 7, Lot leaves his home and shuts the door after him, likely to protect the two angels. Then he begs the men not to be so wicked. Sadly, in verse 8, Lot offers his 2 virgin daughters to the men. Maybe Lot was concerned about his reputation as a host and saw his daughters as less valuable than a man or in this time. Also, perhaps Sodom's wickedness is starting to influence Lot's behavior along with panic. It's clearly terrible for Lot to offer his own daughters to be raped by the men, even if it does avoid homosexual sex. By the way, homosexual sex is seen as extremely perverse in the Bible. Paul uses it in Romans to show when God gives a people up to a depraved mind. Many other things are also perverse, including adultery, fornication, and divorce. And these, unfortunately, are also seen as not shameful especially in the West today. But homosexual sex is extremely perverse. Homosexuals don't all try to be extremely perverse. Some are very shy, others don't understand the opposite sex. Many homosexuals cannot stop being a homosexual even if they tried. But no one can stop living for sin until they become a Christian. Until they are born again, they are slaves to sin. If a homosexual wants to become a Christian and come to church, they do have to fight their sins just like we all have to fight our sins. In verse 9, now we see the climax of their wickedness. They said, "Stand back," and they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge." So Lot came to sojourn in Sodom, and now apparently he is judging Sodom. And then they said, "Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against Lot and wanted to break down the door. So, and this is something you can tell, especially with a very perverse person, very perverse people. When you criticize them at all, they react extremely violently. And these people are incredibly wicked. And Lot is merely trying to stop their wickedness, and even offers up his own daughters, his own virgin daughters, and they want to judge him for that. This is just incredible depravity. And it's also not just sexual perversion, but also violence. In verses 10 through 11, the angels reach out their hands and bring Lot into the house and shut the door. The angels struck the men trying to rape Lot with blindness. Verse 11 says, they wore themselves out groping for the door. Even after they become blind, they were determined to come into the home and rape the men until they exhausted themselves. And this is just showing you how perverse these people are, depraved. This is an idol that they must have. They must have this homosexual sex, even after they're blind. And they're just trying to get into the door and have their sin. Sodom is completely given over to sin. And it reminds me, the Lord telling Cain, sin's desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Well, in Sodom, sin rules over the people. This is likely what people who will live forever in hell will be like. In our day in the world, we have police, we have society, we have militaries, all stopping the potential wickedness of man. However, in hell, man will have no restraints to be as wicked as they want to be. So Sodom is a good example of what people will be like possibly in hell, just completely given over to sin, weeping and gnashing of teeth, just completely given over to sin. There are some people historically that are extremely evil. In America, we had people like Albert Fish and Jeffrey Dahmer, who were just incredibly perverse and wretched individuals. And there was a lot more throughout the world that you can learn, but be careful if you learn about them, because it's very disturbing. And it should also terrify us that we were all born with hearts that have the potential to become that wretched. And Lord, please be close to us and give us soft hearts to love your ways. All right, in verses 12 through 13, the angels ask Lot if he has anyone needing to be rescued before they destroy the city. Lot tries to warn his sons-in-law, but they think he's joking, so they stay. Which, I don't know, I really think it's a little bit funny that they think Lot is joking with them, so they unfortunately are going to be judged along with the city. In verse 15 through 16, as morning dawned, the angels urged Lot and his family to leave. When Lot lingered, the angels took them by the hand and brought them outside the city. One angel said to escape to the hills and not to look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Lot wants to flee to a small city, and the angel agrees not to judge that city. This city was called Zoar, which means little. Lot was saved mostly because of Abraham, according to verse 29. Lot arrived at Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The Lord overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. In verse 26, Lot's wife, who was behind Lot, looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. We know from chapter 13 that this land was wonderful, like the Garden of Eden. Before the judgment, this area was well watered and was great for having a home. It's not surprising that Lot's wife missed this wonderful location. However, by stopping and looking back, she became part of the Lord's judgment. If you're familiar with this region, there are actually pillars of salt around the Dead Sea area. In fact, there are 2 pillars of salt named Lot's wife, although probably both of them, if not none of them, are actually Lot's wife. Josephus, a Jewish historian, also in his time said that he had seen the pillar of Lot's wife, and that it still existed in his time. In verse 27 through 29, Abraham looked down from the place he had seen the Lord to Sodom and Gomorrah. The smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. Lot left Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. There he lived in a cave with his daughters. This is a little funny because Lot didn't want to flee to the hills earlier. He wanted to live in Zoar. He convinced the angels to change the location. So the angels did not judge Zoar. Now he's afraid to live in Zoar, probably because the people there are wicked and they probably should have been judged. And so he wants to live in the hills, where the angels had suggested him go earlier. Next, I don't want to get into too much detail, but both of Lot's daughters want to continue their offspring. So in 2 nights, both daughters sleep with their father. The first night was the firstborn, and the second night was the younger daughter. They both get their father drunk on wine, so he doesn't really know what he's doing. The firstborn son was Moab, which means from father. He was the father of the Moabites. The younger daughter's son's name was Ben Ammi, which means son of my people. He was the father of the Ammonites. Remember, Moses was punished by God and died in Moab. The Moabites and Ammonites often battled with the Israelites in the rest of the Old Testament. We see with Ham's sinfulness and with Lot's daughter's sinfulness that many problems the many problems sin brings into the world. For the rest of the Bible, Sodom and Gomorrah will be an example of God judging wicked people. I decided not to include any archaeology because the History Channel produced a decent documentary of the most likely locations of Sodom and Gomorrah, which I will include with the line message. Thank you for listening.